afternoon. We now move to our next speaker, Navin Piplani. Navin, you can unmute and show up on our screen. And in the meantime, I will be happy to introduce you. So Navin Piplani is the director of the Creative Cluster at Sushant University. He is former founding principal director of Touch Heritage Academy in New Delhi, the Indian National Trust for Cultural Heritage. And before that, he was director of studies and Hamlin Field and Fellow at the Center for Conservation Studies at the University of York. He's trained as an architect and also in conservation. He worked as the conservation architect and core member of the Taj Mahal Conservation Collaborative and assisted one of our other visitors here, A.G. Menon, on the preparation for the charter for the conservation of unprotected architectural heritage and sites in India. In addition, he conceived, developed, and delivered a nationwide program on in-touch cities for culture. And that in turn rested on work that he did in 2005 and 2006 on Delhi, a heritage city, which was a conceptual project proposal for defining and representing Delhi as a heritage city, which led into another project on imagining Delhi. And with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Navin Piplani.
Thank you so much, Professor Miller. It's been a great privilege and honor that you remember our first meetings several years ago, which led to many other thoughts and eventually the framing of this conference. It's indeed a shame that I'm not personally, I'm not there in person due to several reasons. Although we were planning to be there last year and then we had to move it to this year. Anyhow, it's very heartening to see the interest that the conversation on traditional craftsmanship has raised in the American context, and especially at the Bagh Center, leading up to this entire full day of discussion. And interestingly, at the back of the Japanese traditions, which are, again, not very far from what's happening in India. And coincidentally, when I was teaching at the York University, the approaches in the Eastern context did present both Japan and Indian scenario. So it comes quite naturally that you are discussing these two contexts back to back. I'll try and share my screen so that we get on with the subject. Now, having worked at the Taj for several years and having taught at the University of York's conservation course, and having worked with Professor A.G. Krishna Menon, who is there in person, and having worked closely with Yuka Yokiletto and some bit with Sir Bernard Fielden, late Sir Bernard Fielden, more and more, my thinking as a conservation architect is going towards the idea that that the perceived gap between the East and the West is not really as big as we think it is. In fact, it's quite blur. It's quite a gray area. And the more you learn about the Western European and particularly the British approaches to conservation, you realize that what Ruskin and Morris and the later protagonists were saying, including Sir Bernard Fielden, who's quite instrumental in the modern conservation movement in India, it's not really two sides of the same coin. It's really saying the same story, but in a different format. And that is natural because the two contexts are quite different. And therefore, the essence of conservation across the globe, from Japan to New York, I think there is a common thread. And this is because of my own personal work experiences uh, and collaborations with various figures who have been leading conservation across the globe, is that more you talk to each other outside the realm of presentations and outside the classrooms, the more you realize that you are saying the same thing but in a different language and using a different vocabulary. But the essence is more or less the same. So that's really the gist of uh, uh, of my work experience so far, having spent several years in the UK and in India, which leads to this this conversation. Let's say not really a presentation, but conversation on the resurrection of Mehtab Bagh. Mehtab Bagh is the moonlit garden of Taj Mahal, and it's just across the river. So there is the main Taj structure, and then there is the river, and there is a Charbagh garden on the other side, which I will show you in a minute. And what we were doing at Taj Mahal in 2002 onward kind of got converted into a project for Mehtab Bagh 2007-8 onward. So it was it was quite a journey to do that, and therefore there is a huge acknowledgement to be given to all these people who have worked with us from the Archaeological Survey of India, from the global expertise team, including Sir Bernard Fielden, and visits from the Getty Conservation Institute, the World Monuments Fund, and so on. This specific project was funded by the World Monuments Fund and led by several conservation architects and archaeologists and engineers working together. And you'll see this common thread that I'm talking about, how it cuts across these various disciplines of archaeology, engineering, architecture, landscape architecture, conservation architecture, structural conservation, archiving of resources, etc., and so on. This is the basic structure of the presentation today. We look at the sorry. We look at the site. We look at the relationship of the site with Taj Mahal. I need to get out of this. Sorry. And how it was over the past 3 centuries, as it stands today, the site plan, and the final approach. Now I'm straight away showing you an image of this Mehtab Bagh. Mehtab Bagh is actually a garden derived on the Charbagh system with a grid plan. And this is how the original garden would have been, with the 4 octagonal pavilions, with the pavilion in the center, octagonal pool, and barren landscape at the back. In the forecourt is the river and then the Taj Mahal. That's how the two relate. So this image on the left side, this entire big rectangle is Taj Mahal. You would either enter the site from the eastern gate, the western gate, or the southern gate, go through the main gate, main entrance of Taj Mahal, look at the mausoleum. This is the point of the magical view. And if you traveled across, stood on the terrace, looked across the river, on the other side, you would see the Mehtab Bagh. There is no direct link, so you really have to go the other way around, but that's how the two are related. And this visual triangle that you see from the main gate to the Taj is exactly the same triangle that you see from the Taj Mahal across the river if you are when you are at the octagonal pool, which is not really at the center but towards the river. Now, just on the side, most Islamic tombs, most Islamic gardens are in the center of the garden. The tomb is in the center of the garden, and Charbagh is around the tomb. It's only in the case of Taj Mahal that the tomb is moved to the to near the river, to the edge of the garden, and therefore on the other side also the octagonal pool is moved to the edge of the garden. This is basically just a conceptual layout of the site, with a garden, with the tomb, with the entrances, the walls, the river, the mausoleum, the mosque, the guest house, and the garden on the other side, and so forth. Interestingly, this square at the left of your screen, which is Taj Ganj, with these octagonal structures, is exactly the settlement where the craftsmen who built the Taj kind of stayed. So this is like a conservation, the construction site where where the craftsmen were living here and then going to the site and constructing the site in the 17th and 1630s. So that's basically what our discussion platform is for next couple of minutes. That's the view of the Taj. Many of you may have visited the Taj from the pavilion. From the pavilion here, this triangle where it is originating from here, this platform. If you look at the Taj, you would see that, and a reflection of the Taj in the channel that leads up to the Taj. And again, sharing a little bit of insights that we had while working. The Emperor Shah Jahan, who built the Taj in the loving memory of his dying wife, he would walk on this path, on the red sandstone path. He would not walk on the path that we walk today as visitors. He would walk right next to the water channel with the fountains. So it is called the Shah Jahani path that would lead up to the mausoleum. Now, on the right-hand side is the image of Taj Mahal as reflected in the octagonal pool, which I showed you in the drawing. The myth about the Black Taj and the rest of it, which you must have seen in several BBC stories as well, was recreated in one of the videos solving the Taj history. And this image is taken from that video, which actually shows the reflection of the Taj in the octagonal pool. And because it was dark and black and this, that, and the other, the idea, the imagination that there would have once upon a time the idea of making a black Taj by Emperor Shah Jahan, but that's not true. It is the reflection of the Taj Mahal in the octagonal pool, which was actually a sad thing for Shah Jahan because it was in the memory of his wife. Now, this is the relationship, the significance that this space that's left in between the two structures is again exactly a square. So the whole conception of the Taj Mahal from Taj Ganj right up to Mehtab Bagh is composed of squares. And if you geometrically just drew the center point and triangles from the two burjas on this side to the center of the mausoleum and the two burjas of the mausoleum to the center of the octagonal pool, you will arrive at the same triangulation distances. And it is important because this was leading up to the conservation approach that we adopted for Mehtab Bagh. So on the other side is the Mehtab Bagh, this brown square, blue square is the river, and the black big rectangle on the left is the Taj Mahal. That you need to keep at the back of your head. This is how Mehtab Bagh was between 1632 and 1643, the site with the octagonal pool. And then it got flooded, the whole site got flooded. And there are descriptions by various travelers that it almost got, you would not see the Mehtab Bagh from across the river. And eventually it was all excavated in sections, and the pool and how it got, then it came to the surface. And then there was overgrowth of vegetation in this part of the site because nobody was visiting this garden site. Everybody was only going or interested in the Taj Mahal. This is one of the views of how the Mehtab Bagh site would have looked like. And there are some interesting revelations which are coming up, which you would have heard or read, but we got a huge privilege to be able to to be able to provide evidence for that. So currently, there's only one Burj, this pavilion standing. All three other pavilions are not there. This is the current situation. The wall which divided the site from the river is more or less gone, and the inside of the garden is not exactly as how it was. The pavilions are not there, and so on. And the octagonal pool is quite severely damaged. Quite severely damaged. This is the site. This is the pavilion. These are the work teams, and this is the pool. Number one. Number two is the wall. Three is the boat that is standing. There was again a central tank. There were pavilions on the three walls. And then this was on 6 and 7 was the water system to draw water from the river Yamuna, and it was used for the purposes of watering the plants and the trees at the Mehtab Bagh and for its upkeep. So this is what the pool looks like after it was excavated. You see this deposition of sand along the wall. The fountains are gone, the baradari is gone. These are the excavation pits by Archaeological Survey of India. And they were finding pieces of fountain, the floral pattern, the platforms, the arched panel, water fountain. This is all archaeology that was revealed, and then it was covered back. Severely damaged pool. It kind of got submerged in the waters of the river. And then when they excavated, they found it in this really sad condition. And across the river, you see the view of the Taj Mahal. And this is exactly how, this is the same distance from the other side, which I showed you the triangle. So this is how you see the Taj from the other side now, with all the trees and the vegetation gone. But if you came to Mehtab Bagh side, then you would see the Taj Mahal in its original, authentic setting, how it would have been several centuries ago. So the conservation team at site, this is a rectangle pool, octagonal pool, the Taj. You see how interesting it is actually. Something which is the object of attention from the other side is now in the backdrop. And we are more busy looking at the archaeology and the damage and the destruction than the Taj Mahal. That is, thousands and millions of people come to India to look at the Taj, and it's gone to the background. But this is exactly how the narrative of Taj Mahal is. It's a mausoleum. It's not a Disneyland kind of a thing where you got to celebrate, you got to do your picnic, take pictures. It's a mausoleum which reminds you of the sadness of the emperor who lost his most loved wife, and therefore it's a reminder of that loss rather than celebration of some kind of world heritage and this, that, and the other that it is subjective to. Anyhow, this is how the architectural documentation of the pool was taken up, which was then overlaid by archaeological excavations, which were overlaid, with the excavations that were done by the ASI, and some bit of exploration was done while the project was on. So this grid at the bottom actually reveals the pieces which got damaged and which stayed in situ. So these pieces, stone pieces, are still there. And then the condition mapping was done over this site. This is a section that shows how the octagonal pool kind of is in a sunken situation where actual pieces to scale, lying as they were, buried under the earth, and the remaining part of the octagonal pool on the right-hand side. And now looking from the other side with Taj Mahal in the backdrop. This is the southern wall that I talked to you about, where it's quite a close-up. It's a real photograph. It's not photo montage. It's a real photograph that when you get so close to the wall and you look at the Taj, is how it looks like. The wall totally damaged in pieces, and a lot of it was vandalized also because nearby village people, they took the stones away to make their houses and other structures and the rest of it. But there were some evidences of water channels, as how water would have been brought into the octagonal pool, and when it overflowed, how it would have been thrown out back into the river. Now we are standing on the wall, the southern wall, and looking at this condition with engineers from IIT Madras and seismic experts and experts on geology and hydrology, because the major cause of damage to the site was floods. And again, the documentation of the site, the wall, and condition mapping. Now, this is that interesting piece of information that everybody around the globe wants to know, that what was the foundation system? How is it standing? And these are the images to the bottom right and bottom left actually show you the wells, which is the modern day pile system. So this is a section that we had kind of drawn to show how these masonry wells, and at that time they were filled with timber, kind of provided foundation system for the wall and the burj, and which is exactly the same system which is on the other side on the Taj Mahal. So the entire foundation system of Taj Mahal sits on these circular wells, which are modern day piles. A section of showing how these pieces are lying buried under the ground, and the burj itself, the only lone survivor of this entire site. And you can see some bits of in the photographs how these wells are also, some parts of these wells are also still surviving and kind of just putting the site standing in place in quite a vulnerable situation. Now we are right at the well. So you see the excitement to an archaeologist or to an architect to, go down several hundred years back and stand at the level at which the well is, where these two girls are standing, and study that site. So you're almost 400 years back studying how the whole system of buildings would have been erected in the first place. And then came the question of restoring it much later. These are the floor plans of the burj. I'm just showing you as a matter of documentation, not getting into the conservation of it, but how this entire site was meticulous. There's only one element left, the burj, and how it was meticulously documented and condition mapped for the conservation problem. That's the roof plan, beautiful structure, beautifully proportioned. And this is only, out of the 4 burges, the only one left, the section there, that elevation on the right. And finally, all the problems with the conservation issues in the parapet, arch opening, this, that, and the other, and the construction system, where each and every stone piece, how it would have been constructed, is mapped. And this is a rectangular piece, pool, one of the most interesting aspects of the site. And you see how beautiful Taj looks from across the river. And this jali, or this jhalar, rather, not jali, jhalar that you see here, there would have been lamps, small lamps of light kept in these niches at night, and then water would trickle down and flow over this lit up kind of a screen. And then you would see the Taj. And quite an immaculate imagination of the Taj Mahal, where nobody goes. This is a situation where no one goes. It has been detailed out so well. No one can imagine what happens on the other side, which is full of hundreds and thousands and millions of people. But all gone, all kind of in a very bad shape. But still, these are the drawings of how this rectangular pool would have looked like. And even in the drawing, it looks so kind of full of love and affection of this man for his wife, and making something so delicate and yet so solid as somebody's emotion and passion obviously is. And then the condition mapping, and then the final part. Now we see the problem is quite clear, that the river level rises every now and then, and particularly during monsoons. So this water level would come up, and as the records show, the maximum the water levels have risen, which have led to floods, is this 154.83 1978. You see this orange line. So half of the burj was submerged in water, and there are evidences inside of water seepages and the rest of it. And other times also the water has been rising to the level of the plinth of the boat, which means the octagonal tank, which is on the left-hand side, would mostly get flooded almost every 5 years or 10 years. So that makes conservation quite difficult, that even if you were to restore it or conserve it, it would get flooded next year because the wall is not there. This wall that we see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the western wall, is in shambles. So what do you do? So one of the possibility was to re-erect the wall, reclad the wall as it would have been, then flatten out this piece of ground level so that some control mechanism of rising water can be laid here. And that would protect the octagonal tank inside, but still leaving the tank in situ, right? We are only still looking at the wall. And that would involve reconstruction of the wall following the same Mughal system of construction, which, as per the Archaeological Survey of India, India's understanding of the Venice Charter is not allowed. You have to, they would protect the site as found. So if they have found the site in a dilapidated condition, they would keep the site in the dilapidated condition because that's their policy, preserve as found. So that's quite a difficult proposition. Anyhow, the second possibility was to create an embankment system, like a modern day micro dam, that would keep the river water out. Then you have your water level, then you have your ground level, and then you re-erect the wall. So there's another second layer of protection. So even if the first layer failed, the second layer of protection would come into play. Now this was done keeping in mind the restoration, or let's say, I mean, there's no harm calling it reconstruction that we were proposing, which was quite radical for the Archaeological Survey of India, is that you've got everything documented, right? You know where these pieces are, as you can see on the drawing. We know from evidences a historical damage mapping of the octagonal pool. You have all the evidence, you have all the documentation, you have all the stories. Why not get all these things out which are lying buried and dilapidated and this, that, and the other, and start resurrecting the pool. So you start rebuilding whatever was in situ, let's say a couple of meters down at the same level, because it got flooded, it didn't get fired, or it wasn't a building that fell. So we don't know where the pieces went about. It's the caving in of the site. So we know exactly where they were. We can just reconstruct them piece by piece, fountain by fountain, pavilion by pavilion, very slowly and gently, raising this caved-in portion. I'm showing you in stages. So this is the caved-in part, and you kind of bring it up very slowly, very gently, and try and get it back into its original level, original position. And so this was the conceptual idea of getting the whole pool back into its original position. But this is not a historic monument or site. It is an archaeological remain. It is an archaeological ancient site, which is a difficult and a more challenging proposition to work with. And then we had devised various structural calculations, etc., as to how would you do it. Would it fail during the process, or would it cause more damage after being restored, because the soil underneath and the foundation system has been severely damaged due to the flooding. The water would have gone right beneath the structure. And for that, we kind of again conceptually said that, look, if you were to push it up by using mechanical jacking system, obviously computer controlled, and put hundreds of these jacks, because you've divided the whole site into a grid, and then slowly push them like 1 centimeter every day or every week or every 15 days, and see how it kind of behaves. Or you put a rope system underneath and try and roll it up, again grid by grid, piece by piece, and bring it to position. But if you wanted absolutely no intervention to the archaeological site, then you may even use a system that metro uses, the subway system that you erect to two structural systems on both sides and then pull it up piece by piece. Again, very slowly, very gently using the computerized system. So you could either go underneath the archaeological site, you could either be semi underneath and mostly using the tension system to get it up, or just stay away from the archaeological site, put your props quite away, and then just start lifting it up as you would use a crane to make your flyovers and things like that, because those do take place and pass through settlements and sites which don't need to be disturbed, and you have a whole system of flyover. So we were trying to convince the Archaeological Survey of India that how this could be taken up. In order that, now we come back to the same image, but you see the pool restored to its original glory. All the four octagonal, not the four, we didn't do the other two, we just replicated this one. And we said to complete the story, if you remember the two triangles that I showed you, to make the story complete from, while you're looking at Mehtab Bagh from the Taj Mahal, you would complete the story. Similarly, when you are standing here and looking at Taj Mahal, you would see all the two burjas on the other side, as you can see here. And then you get your octagonal pool back with the water fountain and the rectangular tank here. You may not want to fully restore it by putting the Baradari, because Shah Jahan is not there anymore. So nobody is going to sit there and look at the kind of remember the memories of the wife. But at least the archaeological site would be put back into in situ as how it was. And this was the whole idea that we had proposed to the government of India. And of course, it didn't take place because it was, I mean, it was quite a radical thing that they said. One of the comments came, although Eva Koch and representatives from the World Monuments were quite supportive of this idea that if you could do this, which is another form of looking at archaeological site in an Indian context, where you would want to complete the story of Taj Mahal, story of Emperor Shah Jahan, looking at the mausoleum which he had built in the memory of his loving wife. That is more important than keeping the archaeological site as it was, damaged and dilapidated and incomplete, and not conveying what it's supposed to convey, except that it's a fabulously interesting evidence of the destruction of this archaeological sites for the study by scholars and researchers. But the idea here was to bring life back into a dead archaeological monument. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Naveen. And we have time for some questions. Yep. Pratik.
Thank you. This is Pratik Chakraborty. Hi, Naveen. Thank you for a fabulous presentation. And also congratulations on taking up this massive task. And we are all kind of indebted to you and your team for doing this. And when you started that point about in your practice, you are increasingly getting convinced that there is not that distinction between Eastern and Western conservation. And it became clear in conserving that structure, anything goes, any method that is useful has to go. It is not, you don't have to follow particular traditions. You follow what is practical and what is essential. And I also deeply appreciated that you want to keep the emotion of the monument alive. And that sits at the heart of the conservation. So you are not just conserving a building, you're conserving a sentiment, it seems, from your presentation. And that is truly appreciated. My question is, it's slightly that is, where does conservation stop and reconstruction begin? So are you so the dilemma of an archaeological site, what is the end point? Where do you live this structure? And what is the vision? So are you conserving or are you reconstructing as well? Because you found it in a very poor state. And to any level of conservation, it has to be reconstructed as well. So where do you stop being a conservator and become an architect, if you know what I mean?
Yes. That's that's an interesting question, and that's a question that has been asked several times, because when we were also doing the Taj Mahal conservation work, there were these kind of questions that how much do you do, where do you stop, and I think I have shared this with many people that I come across, is that depending on the site, let's say this is Taj Mahal and this is the most iconic sites for India, where is the value and significance? And I'm not referring to the outstanding universal value and the rest of it, historical, archaeological, this, that, and the other, where they are saying that it's the most perfect monument, it's a more perfect architectural design, it's a more perfect this and that and the other, human creative genius and so on. I'm just thinking to myself that, having sat there for several days and several nights, if I were to take any conservation decision, I would start thinking like Shah Jahan. If he were alive, and if this was a situation that he found that, the most important site that he built for his, in the memory of his wife who was dying, giving birth to their 14th child. I mean, so it's a very painful scenario in which the site is constructed. Would he have liked the octagonal pool to be in such a situation? Because that would be most shattering to him. That would be most, where would he go and contemplate? Not by the side of a damaged, dilapidated, broken octagonal pool that would completely destroy the love and affection that he had for his life. So for me, as a conservation architect, and my nutrient fully trained and ingrained and embedded and kind of converted in the Ruskinian philosophy, having done my master's at the University of York, would say, well, the outstanding universal value of Taj does not lie in its human creative genius. It lies in the love of Shah Jahan for his wife. That is the value that I would like to preserve and conserve. And nobody wants to see a building broken down and half damaged, reminding you of the atrocities that is that. Nobody wants it. You construct a building to remind you of the beautiful conception that you had in your mind while you were. So, and we have stopped. We didn't totally reconstruct the site. We didn't reconstruct the terraces and the steps that lay down, because there is no Shah Jahan. But there is a Shah Jahan in the pool who would want to see the reflection of Taj Mahal complete. So there is a bit of a Shah Jahan which defines the extent to which we conserve the site. And then there is another bit of Shah Jahan who says that, look, beyond this is irrelevant. Beyond this is not required. So I would think how Shah Jahan would have thought. And I would like to convey that to the Archaeological Survey of India, who are mere custodians. They are not the designers. They are not the owners. They have no stake in the site except the fact that they are the custodians. So that's how I define the conservation philosophy for this particular site.
Naveen, I'm just going to jump in on the back of Pratik's question because I think there are some fascinating points there. The first is, more generally, I think we can say that what you are guided by is a kind of spirit of the place. And so I wonder how much, or I'm just going to throw out there, is there some connection to the previous talk? Not necessarily that Jinodharana is what is in your mind, but whether we're talking about a different way of saying the same thing. And the second point I want to make focuses in more precisely on what I think was a especially acute formulation, that this is the conservation of a sentiment. And I wonder whether that opens up a kind of possibility, in a sense, for I'll call it the larger project of cultures of conservation, because to recover a historical sentiment, that's not work for an architect. That's work for a philologist. it might be work for a philosopher, it might be work for historians, and historians in the audience know that history of emotion is both a very new field and a very complex one. So when you make sentiment a rule or guide for conservation, preservation, restoration, it actually opens conservation into this multidisciplinary humanities approach.
Absolutely. And here I would go back to the Shastras. And not literally following what the Shastras would say and the Jeevnodharam and the rest of it. But again, the essence of Shastra is that a building is constructed or made in that context, a temple or a house or whatever, by someone called Sthapati. Sthapati, in the simplistic term, we can say a master builder. But a Sthapati in an Indian context was actually a combination of a philosopher, a historian, an architect, an engineer. He was almost next to God. There was God who you could not be, the supernatural, but the Vishwakarma who would create an environment where people would live the rest of their lives is the architect, in a modern day architect, but in those days, Vishwakarma or the Sthapati. So all the disciplines, Professor Miller, that you have outlined, traditionally are supposed to be imbibed in the practice of building, what we now call architecture. However, due to modernity and urbanization and globalization and colonialism and this, that, and the other, all these disciplines have got segregated into what we call specializations. So now I am a conservation architect who is, let's say, permitted to work on a conservation site. In the traditional Indian context, the Sthapati of that place would be called to work on that site. He would not have to be a conservation person. The person who has built the site or monument or building knows the best every inch of that place. And therefore, he is the person using a team of his craftsmen who have actually been working on that site for ages and have got all the knowledge and the skills and the rest of it. So you see what has happened, the total destruction of the understanding of the building activity or the profession or architecture is the person who's built the site, an architect, is different from the person who's going to come and conserve the site, who's a conservation architect, right? And whether we like it or not, these conservation architects, including me, most of them have been trained abroad. And these are the sentiments of Professor A.G. Krishna Menon also. When they go back to their own original context, and there's a huge tension between the master craftsmen and these conservation architects, right? Because they've got completely dissociated from the multidisciplinarity, which was originally part of your training and education. But because you've got trained abroad and you got a degree and the rest of it, suddenly you start feeling superior to the master craftsman who doesn't understand your language, because you're speaking English primarily. So all these things have taken the site away from its original meanings, original intentions, original care, original what we call spirit of the place. I actually don't even like calling it spirit of the place again, because the spirit can be dissociated from body, right? But what we would more comfortable calling it would be the soul. That is who am I? If you take that away, I am no more. But the spirit of me can be taken away and I still be the person. The spirit of Morris is still around and spirit of Ruskin is still around, right? But the spirit of Shah Jahan is not around. And that is why you have octagonal pool in such a situation. So those are my thoughts on this.
Thank you. I think we may have time for one more question. Our pressing coffee break is approaching. No? Okay. Yes, one more. Sunkai.
Hi. My name is Sun Kai, and thank you very much for your fascinating presentation. I work as a conservator, and if I may project sort of my interpretation of some of your responses, it strikes me that in the way in which you've outlined your project, the sort of solutions reveal themselves in the process. And I feel like sometimes we often think about or read about conservation in terms of their objectives or endpoints. And that sort of strikes me as something quite unique. My question actually has to do with the public reaction or public reception to some of the solutions that you've shown us today, and whether you have a sense for how that might play into the possibility of doing this resurrection as you have described.
Well, as I'm sure you can gather from my reactions, the public reaction, of course, is an astounding no. How can you even think about these sites? You're not a conservation architect. You don't know what conservation is all about. How can you resurrect an ancient archaeological site which is about 300 plus years old? Those are the kind of responses that one gets. However, listening to the craftsmen, they feel like if this is an opportunity that is not given to them in terms of restoration, reconstruction, rebuilding, and the other, what would they do? Would they become computer engineers? Or would they migrate to cities and run auto rickshaws and buses and all that? Because this is what their forefathers have been doing. Constructing, reconstructing, repairing, maintaining. It's an everyday activity for them. As I said, conservation was, even in our Shastras, Vastu Shastra, conservation was not a separate thing to be brought on top of a building site because it has now decayed, because the idea of decay was not there. No? The idea was always that you would keep repairing, you would keep taking care, you would keep maintaining. It's always going to be a part of your life cycle. Now that you've got a monumental approach, now you've got boundaries around your sites, now you've got charters, you've got conventions, you've got this and that, and UNESCO and survey and this, that, and the departments and engineers. And you build such a big thing about it that the general public have got disconnected with these sites, which I remember being told that until 1980s, people could just take their cars and scooters and motorcycles and cycles inside Taj Mahal, and they could cut across if they have to go from one end of the Taj to the other. There was markets, there were bazaars inside the Taj, which is all gone, right? So therefore, these reactions that one gets, that how can you bring an archaeological site back to its original glory? It will no longer be an archaeological site, right? Then it will be an octagonal pool, which is got a reflection of Taj Mahal, and you can visit the Taj Mahal even at night in the moonlit. You've gone back 400 years. But that's not conservation. Conservation is a scientific, systematic, let's say, consolidation or keeping the evidence as it is, so that the future generations can, they would know how the site would have been like. And we are saying, why don't you make the site exactly how it was? And then people will know how it was. Let them experience rather than read.
Naveen, I'm going to jump in there. I want to hold you on that word experience and just let it hang in the room for the people here. There's a comment from somebody in the Q&A who writes from the UK, where they work for the National Trust, and they say, we lose buildings because we don't allow for restoration. I wonder how this looks from the rest of the world, who have found ways to understand the significance of the importance of buildings for reasons other than presentation standards and our traditions. And I would just add, on the other side, the danger of Disneyfication that restoration can bring with it. And on that note, we have to go. I want to thank you for joining us and for this splendid contribution. Wish you a good evening and a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.